Hello everyone, this is Nani and this video is all about story writing. Well, story writing is an art which all storytellers and writers possess. And I am pretty sure that after this lesson, we all will be able to frame some fabulous stories. Well, through this lesson, we'll be mastering the art of story writing. So without wasting much time, let's begin. Story writing is an art which requires a great set of communication skills and imagination. So, coming straight back to the question, what is story writing? Story writing is an art. It is a work of imagination that is written in easily understandable grammatical structure. To write a good story, the writer needs to have a clear plot in his mind. The events need to be arranged in a sequential manner. Then there should be some interesting twist and surprise elements in the story in order to make it interesting. Well, here are some star tips, and if you have to write a great story, these tips are surely for you. Tip number one, write in one sitting, develop your protagonist. Well, it's very important that we write a story in one go. Taking a break just hampers the flow and disrupts the connectivity. Also, it is crucial to develop a protagonist, and nearly all stories do have characters or a protagonist. Tip number two, create suspense and drama. Now, you need to add some sort of suspense and drama to your stories to spice it up a little. Well, consider, for example, an two friends, one of your friend, he narrates a particular incident in a bland and a regular way, and then there's another friend of yours who cooks up a story, adding twists and turns, spicing it up a little, and then presents his story. And I am sure that you're going to like a spiced up version of the same story. So, suspense and drama are undoubtedly important elements of a story to keep the reader's interest alive. Tip number three, show, don't tell. Well, we have to write a story in such a way that we try to show the readers by hitting on their imaginations. Simply telling won't really solve the purpose. You have to press the imagination button. Tip number four, write good dialogues. It's quite imperative to add certain dialogues and conversations in our stories. Well, it just develops a connection. Tip number five, end it well. Well, anything that begins has to end. Always end your story in such a way that it solves the purpose. The ending or the climax can be a happy ending. It can be something tragic, or it may leave a question mark for the readers. Tip number six, keep the continuity. Well, keeping a continuity just maintains that link and keeps the order of the events. And then last but not the least, any creative writing is all about the great vocabulary and the phrases, and you being masters of English language can add lots of interesting vocabulary elements to your stories. And I'm sure that after following all these star tips, you're going to become a story writing pro. Now, coming to the main elements of the story. To write a perfect piece of a story, we require certain elements. These are the theme of a story, plot of a story, characters, mood, and atmosphere. So let's begin with the theme of a story. Well, theme highlights the message or the lesson the author is trying to present. It is usually a big idea. Well, it generally refers to the main idea of the story. It can be a message or it can be a moral depicted. It can also be any random abstract idea. The second element, plot of a story. Well, it is the logical sequence of events which leads to conclusion. Now, the type of plot may be adventurous, it can be scary, it can be a mystery, it can be comical or something humorous. We'll study about the plot in the later part of the video. Then the next element, characters. The story generally has animals, people, and other living creatures as characters, but they must be based on a real life to give story some credibility. A story is nothing without characters. And then the last, mood and atmosphere. Well, the mood may be cheerful, it can be happy, it can be tense, scary, suspenseful, or neutral, just depending upon the type of stories we are writing. Now let's have a look at some of the steps that we need. So here are some awesome steps that help us to write a wonderful story. So step number 1, the beginning. Well, it's always said that the beginning is the most important part of the work. So begin with a great starting lines, or in a way your story attracts the readers and the reader gets inquisitive to read it further. Step number 2, characters and dialogues. Now develop the characters in the story and add some interesting dialogues too. Step number 3, the mood and the atmosphere. Well, using the setting and the context to develop good mood and the atmosphere. Now, this is an integral element of the story. Step number 4, the title, moral, and the message. Well, your story should have a title, very important, and should have a moral or a message. Well, there are some stories that don't really end with a moral, but wherever possible, do depict a message. And then the last step, the word limit. Well, no one likes to read long stories. The story should therefore be written in a specified word limit, that is 120 to 150 words. Well, if we talk about the higher classes, that is class 10th, the word limit increases to 200 to 250 words, and this particular creative writing is of 10 marks. But when we talk about grade 8 or the junior grades, so this particular piece of writing carries 4 marks, and we are expected to complete our story in 120 to 150 words. Now let's come to a story triangle. Now to write a story, the writer needs to have a great plot. But how do we get that perfect plot for a story? Well, this may be possible if we consider the story triangle, also called as the Freytag's pyramid. Now let's have a sneak peek into the story triangle. Well, the starting point is the exposition or the introduction to our stories, which is followed by a rising action. Now then comes the climax to our story, which is actually the turning point. Now, as we have a rising action, similarly, then we'll have a falling action, which would be further followed by a denouement. Now, let's have a closer look to it. Now, this is a story which is adjusted in the story triangle. Now, if we have to start writing the story, so I start the story like that this is a story about a child and his sister, both of them who live in a beautiful and a calm house. Now, one fine day, there's a breaking news about a UFO in town. So now I started with the exposition, the introduction, and I just started with the rising action. I just started building the plot. Now, there's something exciting that happened, that there were UFOs in the town. So that is going to be the enticing incident of a story. So there's a breaking news about a UFO in the town. The boy was at his home and the sister had gone out for some shopping. Now, as soon as the boy heard the news, he ran to save her sister. But to his surprise, the UFO had already caught his sister. Now, the boy running is actually the rising action now. Now, the rising action is followed by the crisis, where he finds that his sister was already caught by the UFO. So that is basically the crisis or the problem which is depicted. Now, the guy was disturbed and looked panicked to see his sister under the UFO control, but he didn't give up. He fights the dangerous looking creature. Now, this is a climax. Now, the climax, the turning point is when the sister is caught and, the boy realizes and he is in a dilemma what to do. Now comes the falling action. Now, what was the result of the climax? Actually, it's included in the falling action. Now, the result of the climax was that the boy decided to fight the UFO or the alien from another planet. So, in this harsh and brutal fight, the boy actually killed the UFO or the alien and finally, released his sister. And the sister was liberated and the story ends. This is how this is how we start with the story. We started with an action which built up as a rising action, and then the crisis, the problem, the climax, the falling action, and then the result. So this is how a story has to be formed. Now it's very, very important that we have all these things in a particular fashion. Now let's have a little bit of explanation about the same. So the exposition is the introduction to a story. It describes the setting and introduces the characters. Then comes the rising action, which is called the built up. Now the built up introduces the main problems the main character needs to overcome. Keep adding to the unfolding of the events. Now we add one event on top of the other. Then comes the climax, which is also called as the wow moment. Now, it is basically the most exciting point of the story and is the turning point for the plot or the goals of the main character. Then comes the falling action. Now, the falling action is everything that happens as a result of the climax, including the wrapping up of the plot points, the questions being answered, and the character development. Now, towards the last, the resolution or the ending is not always happy, but it does complete the story. It can leave a reader with questions, answers, frustration, or satisfaction. It may have a moral or a message. Let's look at a format and let's create a story. Now, for writing a story, we have to have a particular format. So now in the center, we start with writing the title of the story, followed by the body. Now the body of the story is actually the main content of the story, the plot of a story, as we already discussed, taking help of the story triangle. Now the word limit, as I already told, was 120 to 150 words. And now for any story, it's very important to use a great language, using vocabulary. So for that, you can take help of the transition words. Now, what are transition words? Now, transition words give the writing a smooth flow and they help the readers move from one point to the next. So in the story, if you have to hop from one incident to the next, rather than ending and adding the story, rather than using the words like and, again and again, so it's very important that we use the transition words. So what are the transition words? Now on the screens, you can see some set of the transition words. So if we have to use some words like, we have to replace the word and we have to show that something is adding to it. So we write the words as well as, furthermore, in addition to, not only, but also. If we have to show some kind of an illustration, so we use the words as such as, in this case, for instance, for example, where we have to show an example, a part of something which is important. If we have to talk about the cause and the effect, then we have certain words like so, because, therefore, hence, as a result, consequently. And if we have to show some kind of a comparison, we use the words like similarly, in the same way, comparable, as if. These are the transition words which you can use and note it down for your reference to create a great story. Now, also, you can use the SAS technique. Now, what's the SAS technique? SAS technique is also called as the stretch a sentence technique. Now, what does this technique refers to? Now, in the starting, as you can see that there are two words which we have, my teacher. So now I have to depict a particular information in my sentence. So we need to stretch a sentence. Now, if I added, what did your teacher do? My teacher displayed an image. When? So my teacher displayed an image last week. So see, I keep on adding the elements in it. So where did she show you the image? My teacher displayed an image last week in the AV room. And what was the image about? What did it do? So my teacher displayed an image last week in the AV room to help us generate ideas for the writing topic. Now, this is how you create a full-fledged sentence which with all the information by just adding the information that we need, and this is how the SAS technique works. Now let's go through certain tips before we discuss about a sample story. So as I told you, fewer the characters, better the story is. So there's less of confusion. So you need to develop the characters for the theme. The theme has to match with the characters. Then comes the catchy first line. So your starting line has to be very catchy. Basically, the information has to be quite attractive. Then comes the title. Now it's very important to give a title to your story. The theme has to be kept in mind, and very important, you need to use the past tense. So stories are all about the past tense. It's talking about the past. We need to use the direct speech and the pronunciation, and there has to be one conflict only. Now, too many things going on at the same time just makes the story, quite problematic, or the interest loses. So it's very important that we stick on to just one conflict. Now let's have a look at the sample story. Now there are two ways in which the stories can be written. Now one way is that certain keywords and points are given to you, and you have to join those keywords and points, and you have to frame a story. And then there's another way where the starting line is given to you and you are expected to write a story in about 120 to 150 words. Now here the starting line is, once in a certain town, a farmer. Now here, if I talk about the starting lines, once in a certain town, a farmer. Now different story writers are going to use their mind differently. They're going to use their imagination and come up with different stories. So here's just one example how a story writer can actually frame up a story. So it's very important to start with the title. So first of all, I give the title in the center. So the title says A Wise Donkey. So I start the story with a time frame. So once in a certain town, a farmer had a very weak and old donkey. One day the animal accidentally fell into a dried up well. Well, see how I started my story with a time frame. So once this happened, once there was a weak and old donkey, and I used weak and old as adjectives here for the donkey. So one day the animal accidentally fell into a dried up well. I cried piteously for hours as the farmer figured out what to do. So it cried. So now it started crying piteously for us. So I'm talking about the donkey here. So it was crying piteously. Well, it's an old donkey, totally worthless. I don't need him. Let him lie where he is. Moreover, I need to fill this well too. I'll throw dirt into it and the donkey will be buried under it, he thought to himself. Now, this is a dialogue which we have added. So it's very important that we use 2 to 3 dialogues in a story, so to make it look lively. So he invited all his neighbors to come over and help him. So they all began to shovel dirt into the well. At first, the helpless donkey couldn't realize what was happening and cried horribly. Then, to everyone's amazement, he quietened down. They all stopped throwing dirt into the well. The farmer looked down the well. He was astonished at what he saw. With each shovel of dirt that hit his back, the donkey was doing something amazing. Now, we started the action with the way that all the people came and they started putting dirt in the well. And then came the climax, the turning point. Now, the turning point was that the donkey was using his brain, and this is what he did. So the farmer looked down the well. He was astonished at what he saw. With each shovel of dirt that hit his back, the donkey was doing something amazing. He would shake it off and take a step up. He had managed to stay above the pile of dirt. Annoyed at this, the farmer urged his neighbors to speed up the work of the filling up of the well, hoping that the donkey would be eventually buried alive. But that did not happen. Now see how the climax happened and what was the result of the climax. So the result was that the farmer, started, filling that well faster. And he told people to do that at a faster speed. So, but that did not happen. Now, as soon as the well was filled right up to the brim, now this is a conclusion which is happening, the resolution. So the donkey stepped up over the edge of the well and happily trotted off. Now this is the ending. So it had a kind of an happy ending. And the moral that we get is, what we learn is, when troubles come your way, instead of crying, find a way out of them. So this is how you frame a story which has all the elements. It had a good plot, it had a good theme, it had characters, it had a mood, it had an imagination, it was exactly in the word limit, and it had less of characters and more of suspense, drama. So it had kind of everything. So this is how you have to write a perfect story with blend of all the tips that we learned in this video. So coming to the final word, stories are fun. They are fun to listen. They are fun to write to. So practice and become great writers. Well, that was all for the day. Kindly practice and practice, because practice makes a man perfect. Write good stories, become good story writers and storytellers. Thank you and have a wonderful day.